All right, sounds good.
Okay, we're ready. Hi, everybody. I am Meg Wubenhorst. Welcome to today's CMO Executive Forum, created exclusively for CMOs and senior marketing leaders like yourselves, where we'll be discussing post-election implications to marketers. So I work within the CMO Master Circle group at the ANA, and if you're watching this, that means you're a part of our Master Circle community, along with 1,400 other CMOs. And here at the ANA, our North Star is the growth agenda. You can go to the next slide. A framework of 4 essential priorities for our industry. We have brand, which is revolutionizing modern marketing to a brands for humans ethos. Data, which is harnessing the power of data and technology for growth and for good. Talent, which is developing talent in high-performing organizational structures and fostering our modern marketing talent. And then, of course, society and sustainability, which is creating positive impact on society in a way that drives growth. So in order to drive these priorities forward, we created the Global Growth Council, which is a team of CMOs and industry leaders who are working together to accelerate these global growth priorities. So on October 19th, about a month ago, we had over 300 CMOs join us at our CMO Summit, where we shared actionable plans with the objective of creating incremental growth opportunities for you, your organization, and the industry at large. So as a senior leader, you've already taken the first step. You're here now with us. You have 2 additional opportunities to immediately help us in this effort. The first is to join one of our Global CMO Growth Council working teams. Again, that's brand, data, talent, or society and sustainability, and share your leadership, insights, and firepower to drive our industry initiatives and growth agenda. You can check out our website at anamastercircle.com for more information and a list of upcoming events. And the second is to schedule a 30-minute executive briefing with one of us, where we will share next steps for our action plans and a deeper dive into these different global growth priorities. And again, you can visit our website to schedule or just reply to any of the emails that we send you on a weekly basis. It's a really important time right now. John and Mark and Ryan are going to talk about the implications of our recent election, and it's a really timely presentation, and we hope you get a lot of value out of it. So with that, I will hand it over to Ryan Linder, who is Global CMO and EVP at MDC Partners. Ryan, take it away.
Hey, Meg, thanks a lot. Hey, everybody. Good to be back again. Just to give everybody a little refresh, MDC and the Harris poll started polling consumer sentiment on the crisis as it unfolded in early March. Since then, we've been in the field 3 to 5 nights a week, asking Americans about everything from contracting the virus to finances, to the economy, to societal unrest. The list goes on. And what they need from marketers, most importantly, to help restore consumer confidence. Today, as Meg mentioned, we're kicking off the CMO Executive Forum, featuring essential insights for CMOs. Post-election implications for America in 2021 is the theme, and then drawing from data and research conducted by the Harvard-Harris Center for Political Science and Studies and the Harris Poll's weekly COVID surveys. Today, I'm joined by my teammates and good friend, Mr. Mark Penn, chairman of the Harris Poll, CEO and chairman of MDC, president and managing partner of the Stagwell Group, and John Gerzema, CEO of the Harris Poll. Guys, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan. Hey, Mark, good morning. How are you?
Morning.
I'm really excited to have this conversation. This is our 3rd installment in the CMO guidance series, where we attempt to bring society into the C-suite. And I'm really excited to have Mark with us this morning. You know, Mark has a really interesting position as we look at, I guess we could call it maybe Madison Avenue and K Street, because you were both the CMO of Microsoft and the architect of many campaigns for both Tony Blair, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton. And I'm curious maybe to kind of kick this off, you know, sort of what's your view at a high level on the elections, and what do you think marketers can learn from it?
Well, I think that, thanks, John. And it's been exciting working with you and kind of having been a participant, you know, on both sides over the years, you know, really honing in, you know, from the center here on kind of what happened and what's happening kind of free from partisan talking points. So I hope this will be a conversation that that is open and that gives people some insights into the incoming data and information. As our chart says, post-election implications. Are we in the post-election? Or are we still in the election? Certainly, I think we're in the transition in any event as election conversation dies down. But let me give you kind of an overview of what happened and what its implications are and what people are still doing relative to COVID, and then come back to some questions. So John, if you flip over to the next. So, I want to kind of give one overall observation that I think has been lost in the shuffle here when you really look at the data. We really are one country divided by two parties. When I say that, what I mean is that the truth of the matter is most of the country is moderate. Most of the country could agree on most issues and compromise on them, whether it would be taxes and stimulus or immigration or healthcare, could probably in 5 or 10 minutes come to a compromised position. And we find that pretty much in almost all the polling. But the two parties are unable to so far do that. And consequently, the two parties give the illusion that it's America increasingly divided, when in fact, part of the problem is that they just don't have a choice, right, that fully satisfies the compromises that they support and that then brings them together. So each president in the last several, well, not Trump, but certainly Obama hoped to bring real national unity and did, and I think Biden's running on that theme and did, and Trump didn't. And so consequently, the two parties are pulling the country to these directions, which is not reflected in the underlying data. Next. And this brings us to an important point of the media narrative of kind of what's going on or what was going to go on, right? The landslide that didn't happen, the expansion of the House, the loss of all the Senate seats, and kind of what the data is showing. So there are a couple of things, and I've got an op-ed coming out, I think soon, in the Wall Street Journal that kind of goes through in detail the comparative exit polls we have from 2016 and 18 adjusted for the results. So I believe that they have a high degree of accuracy. And so several important things really come out of that analysis. First is, are we as a country turning more liberal or more conservative? Actually, more conservative. The percentage of liberals voting went down 2%, and the percentage of conservatives went up 3% to 38%. And so about 3/4 of the country's moderate or conservative. Very hard to see that, through the media narrative. And that's a lot of the point of these results that keep coming out differently from expectations of the results is obviously the country is not 100% different from what you see, but 5 or 10% different from, I think, the media narrative and what's been presenting. So I think you'll also find, as you look through the data, really quite surprisingly, Trump's vote among white women expanded rather than shrunk by 2 points. And that the biggest change within the electorate that really didn't change all that much is that moderate men actually that supported him by 30 points dropped to around 23 points of support. And those moderate men, better educated, turned out to be by and large, the largest swing vote. And the increase in percentage that Trump got among minorities has been kind of exaggerated. It's true in Florida. It's true in border towns in Texas. It's not that true elsewhere. And the percentage of voters of color did increase 4%, and the percentage of white voters dropped from 71 to 67, but the increase was mostly among the Latino vote that went up 2 points, and Asian and others that went up another 2 points. So there's probably very little. And then and what I've told you that I think has come through, and then next, do you think the electorate has gotten younger, or do you think it's gotten older? And again, the percentage of younger voters, 18 to 29, dropped significantly compared to the increase in the percentage of 65 plus. And again, I think shattering the basic narrative that everything that you see tends to be tilted towards the younger voter and that excitement, when if I told you that the country became a little bit more conservative, moderate men made the difference, and older voters outnumbered younger voters. Last time it wasn't true in the previous election. Now it's true by several percentage points, and it looks like a continuing, like a continuing trend. You would see that in fact, getting a real handle on what's happening as a marketer is really separating yourself from media narrative and really plowing into the data that you've got, in ensuring its accuracy and understanding the changes. Next. So I think the most interesting kind of thing that came out with the marketing styles of the campaigns was that obviously the Trump campaign really did a social media strategy combined with fan marketing, big events. And since turnout increased on both sides, you'd have to say that strategy in large measure was successful in terms of its objectives, although it fell short because the other strategy was to rely much more on outspending on TV, not do in-person events, and then also rely on social media. So the common framework was social media as a marketing platform became more important. And then the question is, was it driven more by TV advertising, or was it driven more by in-person events? Clearly, I think both of those emerge, but ultimately the Biden campaign was more successful at drawing in moderate voters and switching some of those moderate voters. And the downside, I think, of, if you look at the biggest mistakes that the Trump and the Trump campaign made, they didn't have a clear second-term agenda. They didn't really have as effective a message or even slogan as they did last time, kind of retreading on their previous stuff. They closed late with this strategy that they had, but compared to the previous campaign, I think from a marketing point of view, the failure to really reach out to swing voters throughout the entire presidency and limiting themselves to fan marketing or base marketing really was ultimately why they fell short. On the other hand, I think if you look at it, they more limited the in-person events, the TV and social media strategy, and a greater outreach to the middle was somewhat more successful. But the vote was a lot closer than people expected. If this campaign had really been about character, then there would have been a 20-point gap in the findings instead of the 3 to 4 point gap that we really have. And that says that it was a lot more issue oriented than people realize, primarily the issue of the virus and the economy turning out to be the #1 issue of voters there, and the virus the #2 issue. But the Trump campaign and government just made huge mistakes in the way they handled the virus. They didn't handle it as a bipartisan issue. They didn't appoint a general above politics to head it. And so it continually devolved into what was seen as a partisan or political effort, which I would have to say, having advised another president for kind of 6 years, working in the White House through a re-election campaign, that was a fundamental, mistake and approach that was made, both in actuality and in terms of marketing and politics. Next. I think this is a pretty good marketing lesson. Reducing friction is a pretty good idea if you want to achieve things. And I think it's generally the lesson of online shopping today. And for the companies who have an online experience that is kludgy, that is hard to use, that doesn't anticipate what consumers really want. In many ways, the choice between in-person voting, where you have to show up, stand online, take half a day off, and sending in a mail-in ballot, a friction-free event, relatively speaking, where you have to somehow find your way to a drop box or a post office or give it to somebody who mails it, is obviously a far simpler and more friction-free, kind of process. And I think that obviously the Biden campaign made a huge effort in promoting that. And probably from a tactical point of view, that was also a huge mistake of the Republican Party, because whatever percentage of people, no matter whether they were increasingly motivated to turn out as they were, fundamentally showing up on election day, getting time off, making sure the weather is right, is a much riskier process than collecting ballots, earlier on in a campaign through a more friction-free process. Next. So, there is a combination of pandemic fatigue and election fatigue here, a desire to get back to business. I mean, I think you're going to see that in some of the couple of the slides coming up, right? In which really, it really, as you think about it, they've been saving for a long time. We've got some great vaccine news. People are looking to get out there and spend and do again. And at a certain point, they kind of are beginning to turn off and tune out, this election that has fascinated people in one form or another for the last 4 years. And so I do think that you're going to see people back to business. Next. How did the polls come out? Well, if you look at the list, we do the Harris poll and the Hill-Harris poll, actually 49-45. We really are at the top in terms of polling accuracy. There's no poll more accurate. So it was possible to do accurate polling, but it requires, as I said, I think a continued evaluation and reevaluation, right, of what America, looked like. If you think about, say, Fox News had an 8-point poll, and by the time you get to Quinnipiac, NBC, Wall Street Journal, they were in 10 to 12 points. Now, 10 to 12 points was never happening. It should have been fairly obvious that a 10 to 12 point election would have been about 40 states. And so that didn't pull back pollsters from a basic reality check of their data. And I think we had some polls that went up. We were at 2, we went up to 8, and then at the Harris poll, came down to 4 as the race did I think fairly close at the end. So all this stuff about the polls being terrible, not all polls were terrible. You can have good data you count on, but it really and a lot of this came from such a heated situation in states. I didn't even bother to poll in certain states where hundreds of millions of dollars were being spent. And I think in some states like Maine and South Carolina, people stopped giving pollsters true answers. I don't think that was true nationally. I do think that was true in some places where a social stigma became attached to revealing, what you thought, and you did see, I think, voters really pull back from being honest in some of those states, because some of those states were off by 20 points. Next. I will say from a corporate reputation point of view during the pandemic and through the election campaign and Congress's inability to pass a stimulus, don't forget that all of these surveys you've heard about how terrible people regard corporations, maybe they were true then, but the truth of the matter is when push came to shove, a lot of American corporations, healthcare corporations that are announcing, vaccines now, groceries, that really kind of supplied people's everyday needs, FedEx, Amazon, Walmart, a lot of the major brands, they reestablished the idea that actually companies can be relied upon. And I think this did a tremendous amount of good over the last year for corporate reputation and image. I think that made running against corporations, a lot harder than it was a year or two ago. And it does, I think, again, to the extent that media narratives outlie reality, as I always say, go with the reality. And the reality is Americans really relied on corporations a lot more. Next. This is the basic data that really John has been tracking. And this basic data shows that a curtain of fear kind of went up on the country, and it has yet to come down. And this curtain of fear, I do think that at the end of the day, the virus and the failure of the Trump administration to get a handle on the virus was the reason that they didn't win relative to the economy. I mean, you have here almost 80% saying that they're afraid to leave their house to do normal errands. And as the virus numbers have gone up in the last wave, you see an uptick, right, in all of these issues of fear. About half of the country is afraid of dying as a result of the virus. So fear is a very powerful motivating force here, and it continues at very high levels. Next. What will people kind of get back to, right? And you really kind of see this order, which is interesting, because the order at which people are willing to go back, they say they're willing to go back to the office, although a lot of people, they're saying, like, once the spread of the virus is flattening, how long do they expect? They expect then a pretty vigorous return to the office once this is declared as over. And you can see out to dinner, going to a gym, staying in a hotel, public transportation, those all come next. Going out to dinner, even though it seems to be among the more hazardous activities, is what people, that combination of fear and desire puts it up there. And at the way bottom of the list, going to sporting events, visiting casinos, taking a cruise, flying on a plane. Again, rightly or wrongly, I think the airline industry has a lot more kind of difficulty getting passengers back, although it's beginning to climb. At least it was down to 250,000 a day, and now it's somewhere over a million a day. You see a tremendous amount of fear continue to be associated with those activities in particular. Next. Again, there's been, if you've been following this, there's been a lot of saving, and people have been postponing celebrations. They've been delaying travel. They've been taking road trips. I mean, all of this says that there's a lot of pent up demand in this economy once we actually turn a corner here. That rather than once we turn a corner, rather than an electorate that's going to, a consumer group that's going to tentatively tiptoe back, I think you're going to see a kind of a roaring back. Next. And this was done before today's announcement, but I do think the vaccine announcements here are beginning to have the potential of changing the picture. If you look at it, you have kind of 68%, right? 58% showing, 58% showing optimism, 42% in a very, very pessimistic world about when this will be over. This is something that I think says, well, okay, maybe we'll be able to get back to the office and conferences and events sooner than we expected if we see the vaccine coming through. Next. And this is a question everybody's always been asking: how likely are you going to take this vaccine? If you look at this, 60% now say they're likely. This is down from 73. Now, this is before today's announcement, but you can see that it is fascinating that vaccine skepticism, which had been a minor and small movement, continues to grow, and you can see that Black citizens at 46% likely to take it, white at 62, Democrats 66, Republicans less likely to accept the virus at 58, seniors more likely to line up. Young boomers a little more hesitant, an interesting split. I wouldn't have expected it. And guys, 69% versus women, 52% likely to take the vaccine. So you have to say that the concerns about the vaccine Of course, these are new vaccines, so that they're legitimate issues of the unknown here. But you really see this this male-female difference being an enormous difference in terms of faith and confidence in the companies and the vaccines themselves. Next. And again, I think we've all called this revenge spending, going on vacation, buying new clothes, buying gifts for friends and families. We're seeing this from wave to wave really substantially increase. So back in March, it was only 24%. Now it's up to almost 40% that want to go on vacation, take a trip. Buying a car has almost doubled. Again, you know, you look at the overall not planning a purchase has gone down from 51 to 28%. There is, you know, there is going to be an enormous unleashing of consumer demand here when you get to the right, the right tipping point back, which, you know, which sort of somewhere between January and May, if I were guessing. I think that, you know, the first vaccine distributions will really start to occur based on what I've heard in early December. Next. And this whole idea of a workation, I mean, right now you have a lot of people going through and saying, well, you know, they don't really have that much to do on a vacation, but I still want to go on a vacation, so I'll still go somewhere, but I don't have much to do since I can't really leave where I'm going. I'm pretty much stuck working anyway. So it's an interesting combination here of, you know, because so many people are working remotely, and to the extent they're working remotely, where they consider 68% of those would consider a workation, going away somewhere, but still continuing to do their work. I don't know whether companies are going to find this good, bad, or different. Next. Just a couple of quick polls to give you some background, again, on kind of resetting a little bit what you think America is like. The American dream is still alive, with 59% saying that they live the American dream. And what makes America great? Well, living in a multi-ethnic society, having tolerance across all beliefs, right? And the willingness to fight. Those two things really are 46%. You know, the whole notion that America is a melting pot all the way back to de Tocqueville really remains kind of a strong concept, you know, beneath the American dream, along with things like the willingness to fight for things that are right. Next. And then if we look at these symbols, again, we did ask this question: which symbols define the true spirit of America? And the flag, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence still came out really quite strongly. You know, as you look at it, obviously those over 65, when you get to the Constitution, there's huge age gaps here between 18 to 24, who you know, the flag sort of actually came out as a pretty strong symbol across. You may notice Joe Biden winning has a lot of flags behind him. And the Constitution, actually an enormous difference between young and old. The Declaration of Independence, an enormous difference between the young and old. Statue of Liberty, again, somewhat different. Peaceful protests came out again among the younger generation. So for marketers, they are seeing kind of some very different worlds here between younger and older in terms of symbolism. Now, I've been around for a while, so I remember the 60s when rebellion in the university was even more extreme than you see today, because people always say times are unprecedented, but the Vietnam War actually created what I would call even more division, you know, among the country than I see today. Next. And when it comes to what are distinctive American qualities, the idea of freedom of speech, opportunity to vote in free and fair elections, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, found particularly how freedom of speech is is the number one quality that people really associate with America. I think it's something that it's easy to forget in all of the discussions that go on today. And I've seen this in poll question after poll question, and I've seen questions with a lot of concern about the tech companies. And I really joke that, and it's not a joke, because 40% said in a recent poll question that they thought that liberal speech was being censored by tech companies, and 60% said that they thought conservative speech was being censored. That means that everybody thought that speech, or 100% thought that speech of one form or another was being censored online. And that's a problem when the number one value is freedom of speech. Next. And there's a lot of enthusiasm for America itself. America is seen by overwhelming numbers here as the best country in the world. And Americans have always been self-critical of the country, while at the same time, comparatively speaking, see the country as the best. Now, there's a big difference, 86% of Republicans, but it's still 61% of Democrats, 66% of Black voters, 72% of white, right? So there's very kind of broad agreement here. Even if there are differences, a majority of every subgroup says America is the best country in the world. Next. And again, when you look at what's happening in terms of income, about half the country says their income is not affected by really the virus. About 28% sees it as lower, and about 24%, higher than I would have thought, says it's been higher. I always say that there's three kinds of companies here. Those companies that have more customers than they expected to have through the pandemic, those that are kind of going with the change in the economy and the setback, and those that have real safety issues and have declined almost to zero, or for a while declined to zero, mainly casinos, cruises, and airlines. And so you kind of see how there's a varied effect too among consumers. Next. And so what about political advertising? I mean, I always take with a grain of salt asking people to say whether or not advertising had impact on them, because they always say it doesn't. I will say, though, what surprised me about some of the questions we asked is what forms of political advertising would make you more encouraged to vote. Obviously, this was a social media election. This is the first election in which I can say that social media, I think, as relied upon by both campaigns, was close to being as important as both television advertising and rallies. And you see it always consistently coming in second in terms of what people recognized or saw. And that would not have been the case in previous elections. It would have been far down the list, below mail and below other forms of communication. And TV would have been way higher. Next. And again, although they saw a lot of TV advertising, again, and they got a lot of mail, they're really placing it, I think, much closer between TV and social media as the two drivers, and mail coming in third. Next. And then finally, just a question on how did social pressure actually work in the election? And we, about half or more said they didn't feel any pressure from anybody. To the extent people did get pressure, it seems like Democrats got more pressures, particularly from friends, than Republicans, because that's 21% versus 15%. And spouses, again, generally people were more, there was more social pressure pushing Democrats to vote than there was social pressure pushing Republicans to vote in 65%. But social pressure, I think, was clearly a significant factor. So I think that's an overview. I know we want to get to overall questions. John, if you've got one or two you want to ask, or you want to go straight to audience questions.
Yeah, I'm going to just maybe tee you up one, and we're going to go straight into the questions from the chat. But I thought it was really interesting. I mean, a number of things to kind of maybe draw the political into the marketing. But can you talk a little bit more about the energy in this election, the number of new voters from both sides? I mean, how should a marketer sort of think about that when they think of their customers?
Yeah, well, uh, there's a kind of contrarian view that comes out of this election because for a long time, well, let me kind of hit a few points. Number one, I lament that the campaigns have become so negative. When I was doing the campaigns, we were probably 50-50 negative, positive on a presidential level. And we had, and they really have devolved into about 90% negative. And it just turns out to be easier marketing wise to tear somebody down than build them up. And this is a continuing problem in political marketing, because then people would always say that turnout is depressed by the fact that politics is so negative. But it appears that all of this negativity drove higher turnout. And so the higher turnout, I think, is really tied to the higher engagement, right? And when you looked at enthusiasm, the Republicans pretty much showed almost 2 or 3 times the enthusiasm, and I think you're seeing in some of the down ballot races that having some real impact. But I go back to that earlier slide. I think that what the Democrats lacked in enthusiasm, they made up by better tactics in a more friction-free kind of voting. And when we were looking at our polls pre-election, we saw like 10 or 15 points spread between those people who were going to vote by mail, Democrats, which is just an easier thing to do, and those people who were going to show up on election day, Republicans. And I think that alone, given that so many of these states were so close, was a mistake, not in strategy, but a mistake in tactics.
And Mark, is there a lesson in there for marketers about making assumptions about your fixed demographics or sort of your customers? I mean, there were some surprising things. Moderate men, I'm completely surprised that moderate men were the key to the election.
Yeah, and a lot of what I say is, never think that the customer base or the demographics of the country or the appeals of these parties are fixed. Black voters voted Republican until 1960 and 1964. And while I think the whole switch in minority voters was overplayed, it was true that Cuban, Venezuelan, other Latino voters showed greater enthusiasm and switched, several congressional seats in Miami-Dade and so forth. And so it's not fixed that different demographic groups have to vote in ways. Demographics is not destiny, right? And in many ways, what happens is parties reconfigure themselves when faced with challenges. And they if you look at the number of women Republicans winning in Congress, it shows you the extent to which losing parties will be far more adaptive. And that's true in the marketing world too. Competition, competitors will be far more adaptive. Today's customers I often talk about incumbent brands versus challenger brands. And challengers eventually become incumbents, and they have to learn how to act like good incumbents. Trump went from a challenger to an incumbent, didn't know how to act as an incumbent, tried to rerun the same playbook, and got lost by almost an incumbent coming back, right, who ran more of an incumbent-oriented campaign. So I do think that there can be far more change than you expect, and once you get a really fixed view of the American universe, particularly, I think again, when you look at the demographics, continuing substantial increase in the size of the Latino vote. And that means continuing substantial increase in the Latino consumer base as well, that I always find gets ignored by too many marketers.
Very interesting. I'm going to go to the chat room now from the CMO community. Craig Rothenberg asks, with Trump's firm grip on the GOP, how do mainstream elements of the party influence its direction heading toward the midterms in 2 years and then the next presidential election 4 years hence?
Yeah, well, once you're out of office as president, I think a lot more change kind of takes place than people are expected. It's a very future-oriented country. Obviously, Trump has a tremendous amount of enthusiasm among voters, but I don't know how he's going to parlay that. Is he going to set up? There's a lot of talk of a new Twitter, of a new network, of a new media outlet. I don't think that the problem, by and large, isn't that the Republicans are coming off as too conservative. That's not what you're seeing in the election. People didn't like Trump. They didn't like Trump for his character. And that's why the campaign focused on his character. When it comes to it issue by issues, the Democrats have more problems being seen as too far to the left on the issues. And that's a bigger problem. If you look at the left-right spectrum, that is a bigger problem. So I think that the influence of a former president, whoever and whomever they are, will change over. It just lowers pretty quickly. I mean, I saw it myself with President Clinton. Our next speech at the convention after we left office was an hour, and then the one after that was like a half hour, and then by the last convention it was down to 5 minutes.
Right. Really great. Manish asked the question, Mark, is there any data on the percentage of the population that feel the election was stolen?
I think we're going to have data this week on that. Stolen and rigged and unfair. There are all these different degrees, degrees of that. And so I think ultimately people won't think that ballots were falsely counted. The question is whether or not they'll think the media and all of the things that conservatives and Republicans perceive of as unfair, right, were amounted in a sense to rigging an election without changing. I don't see that there'll be a lot of support for the idea that the votes themselves were miscounted. But were they unfairly gathered? Was the media unfair? Were presidential races? Was Trump Russia? I think you're going to have a lot of sentiment like that. But that's because, look, if I ask a question, do you think X is unfair, right? I can get a pretty 50-60% response to almost any of that, because it's a public that appears cynical. It's like a lot of those corporate reputation questions. But when push comes to shove, what do they really rely upon? If you notice, free and fair elections were really important to what the public thinks.
Mm. The markets, Mark, have also sort of began pricing in the Biden administration, thinking about future stimulus package. And one of the questions we have here is, will the Biden administration be perceived as being good for business?
Well, that's an open question. A lot of that will depend upon the outcome of the Senate, because to the extent to which the Biden administration, first of all, obviously winding down the virus is quote good for business, but in terms of those perceptions, the general thinking, and I think that it's more or less right, is if the Senate is in Republican hands, then you're going to see significant compromises by a president who really does have a pretty strong history of being a moderate. And the very narrow House majority also suggests that will be the case, as opposed to if the election had come out the way people predicted, with a very strong Democratic majority in the Senate, ending the filibuster, I don't think there would have been enormous pressures to move to the left. But as I said, you can't look at this electorate without coming back and saying there are a lot more in the center than people realized.
Real interesting. And you also raised the point a little bit earlier about, and this is the next question, what is your perspective on why the country is becoming more conservative? Can you go a little bit deeper on that?
That's a good question as to whether or not, as to why that is. Part of it is, again, to go back to demographics, the country's getting older. We were supposed to have a massive Social Security crisis for a reason, which is that the age structure of the country has been tilting, as I always say, this is the oldest that America has ever been in its history. And so the older generation, which is, I've observed that when it comes to marijuana laws, the older generation has been they've loosened up, right? Or as I say, when it comes to sin, the older generation is okay when it comes to those issues. But when it comes to kind of more bread and butter American values issues, they definitely have turned more conservative. They are more pro-capitalist. They reject a lot of the issues. If you look at kind of the California referendums that went down, even in California, to increase taxes and to get rid of colorblind employment and other decisions, you really see that there is a kind of a reaffirmation of these core values of free speech, equal opportunity, being a melting pot at the same time. And I think that a reaction to political correctness also has moved people kind of into a slightly more conservative column. Remember that none of these changes are all that big, but if you were going to judge by the media narrative, and I think the narrative that you see kind of coming into industries that are primarily based in New York and Hollywood, is really out of sync with the more middle of the road nature of the country.
No, exactly. And speaking of conservative, there's a follow-up question, which is, with over 10 million initial signups, do you think Parler, the new social network for free speech, will have staying power?
Well, whether or not it'll have staying power or not, it still definitely is meeting a concern that people have. I mean, I remember I was also chief strategy officer over at Microsoft, and so I have a lot of familiarity with some of these issues. And we also kind of, when I worked with Clinton, worked with the entertainment industry to create the rating system that's still in existence today. I don't think that the tech companies can continue without change making the decisions here about what they allow, what they don't allow, without a common set of standards getting adopted. And so if that common set of standards doesn't get adopted, you could well have a balkanization of the social media industry over this issue, right? Because tens of millions of people do consider this important. It is a primary value. And at the same time, people want to remove hate speech, but they also want to leave a pretty wide, ambit and more narrowly define what they consider hate speech and fighting words to actually be. And most importantly, I think they want it applied on a consistent, appealable form, right? I mean, right now it's very funny. I happen to have as a hobby a political game, and it's just a game. It doesn't take any political issue. And because bots decide what's political advertising, the advertising on the game has been shut down. And although every human you talk to says, oh yeah, you're exempt, I cannot run an advertisement for the game 270 US election. Feel free to try it. I cannot run it because the bots rule. And so you can't have a society in which bots indiscriminately rule on which speech is allowed and which speech is not, because bots can't distinguish between a game and an actual political ad.
Absolutely fascinating. This is somewhat related to it, but this is sort of a look ahead based on your discussions earlier. The speaker says this info is great, and it just reinforces how some outlets' polls are biased, leaning in a particular way. How does some of this info inform your thoughts, Mark, on 2024? More social? Will it rally the younger voters? Will it rally conservatives out to the polls? Thanks for the convo.
I mean, look, we don't know yet what the Biden administration will be and how kind of where the administration will decide to go forward and how that will work out. I mean, look, I worked with Clinton. I got called in after the '94 congressional elections were a disaster and after healthcare was a disaster. So I don't know if they're headed for that kind of similar rec? I don't think so. I think that they've got a lot of people whom I know who are, including Ron Klain and others, who are really kind of savvy about understanding that they want to have some early manageable successes going forward, and I think learned a lot of lessons from those first 2 years in the Clinton administration. So, so I think in many ways what I try to say is, let's do a better job at understanding the present, and then we'll be better at trying to predict the future. We are notoriously off about the future, and I think one of the reasons is that we don't understand the present. And the present is telling us it's a more centrist country, right? More somewhat, more conservative in values than we thought, and that we have to digest that. We have to make sure that our polling models, when we say, oh, a majority supports this and majority supports that, well, maybe it's not a majority. Maybe it's, if that question was within 5 points, maybe it was 4 or 5 points off, because polls were telling us it was an 8 to 12 world, and in fact it was a 2 to 6 world, and that means that it's a different world than a lot of the data shows, and you have to adjust your thinking for the present. One analogy I'll just throw in, which I kind of sometimes say, is, are we repeating what happened with Nixon, Carter, and Reagan? Not in the sense that, but in the sense that Nixon was an unacceptable president and was impeached, but in this case, Trump was impeached, but then really didn't win re-election. And is Biden a transitional figure the way Carter? And then will the real election for the next decade that really sets us on a course, presuming Biden doesn't run for a second term, be that 2024 election? That I'm not saying it's going to come out in the conservative direction the way it did with Reagan. I'm saying, actually, I think it's really up for grabs, and how the Biden administration gets off, I think, will have a huge effect on the direction and the leaders who emerge for the 2024 election, which will be equally hard fought, I hope, in a different way, and one that is not 90% negative, but presents more contrasting views of a future vision for the country, which is the way I like to see elections run.
Yeah, absolutely. Great point. And speaking of the president, our good friend Amy Fuller asks, when do you think this transition will start normalizing? And do you think Trump's hold on the GOP will endure?
Again, I kind of look past all the legal fights. The Biden administration, they've been around a long time. They know these security briefings. They know how they're already planning a pretty efficient transition. I think that there'll be a large segment of the voters, as there was in the previous ones, who do say that the election was unfair. But I think things will move forward. I think Biden will be given, I think people will turn into the inauguration, and they'll want to hear. I think Trump fundamentally blew his inauguration because he gave a highly kind of partisan. It wasn't a unifying speech. He made the opposite mistake. I don't think Biden will do that. I think he will instead give a very strong, as he did at the convention, a strong speech that will help move the country forward. And so I do think that we are going to be normalizing kind of from that point. And hey, we didn't normalize after the last election. I think actually no one acknowledged the winner of the last election one way or the other. The country remained completely divided. The president-elect's ratings did not go up. In a more normal situation, the president-elect's ratings go up. People didn't vote for him. Give him a fair chance. And I do think those things will happen in this case.
Great. Two last questions for you, Mark. How have Harris insights about the U.S. compared to what's happening globally? What are other countries feeling and doing?
Compared to globally, how would you interpret that, John?
Probably, looking at the global data. And I know that recently, Meg and team, we can recirculate the work that we did with the Milken Institute that looked at 27 countries, views on leadership, views on COVID, and on the future. But this is a specific deep dive into the U.S. political scene.
I don't, again, you're seeing Europe I'm going to say that Europe's in a much more, I think, probably troublesome spot almost than America is in terms of handling the virus and confidence in the leaders. And like I said, here, I think stability of the country through the virus, I think, is going to emerge fairly strong, and stability of American business and innovation as leading the world, I think, really comes out of this stronger than people expected. Absolutely. And remember, internationally, we do have, China right now had a 14% rating in this country. There are fundamental changes in the way we relate to some of the other countries, particularly China. And how the Biden administration deals with that is yet to be seen.
Great. Last question. Many believe we're living in a post-truth media world. Any suggestions for brands navigating this going forward?
Yeah, I think one of the more interesting questions I've had, other than the low ratings of the media, was when I asked people, do you think the media is hard or easy on Trump? And 65% said hard. And they said, they're hard or easy on Biden, and 65% said easy. So what I detected from that is that look, people see media bias as a real problem here. I don't know that I don't know that we're going to deal with it. The media is going to have to come to a reckoning on this issue, because it's too noticeable, it's too big, and everybody kind of sees it, and so if you're trying to navigate it, it mostly says that your own independent voice is going to be increasingly important, and watching what you say as opposed to and correcting it in terms of what the media says you say, right, can oftentimes be two very different things that you have to be constantly monitoring. And the social media platform at least gives you an opportunity, I think, if you feel that you're being incorrectly characterized, to correct the record and have a voice in doing that.
Mark, thank you very much. Great discussion. We're right up on the hour. We've got a minute left, and we're going to give people back their whole minute. How does that sound? Thank you so much. And Meg, I'll turn it back over to you to close. But if you need any more information, all this data that Mark's been discussing is published on the harrispoll.com website.
Thank you. Thank you both. And the slides and the recording will be available and emailed to you as well. So if we didn't get to your question, we'll follow up separately. And we'll continue to bring exclusive CMO content like this as part of our Global CMO Growth Council. A huge thank you to Mark and John and Ryan for today's really informative and important presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.